So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian War Museum. My name is Caroline Dramaguet, and I'm the CEO of the War Museum and the Canadian Museum of History, just across the river. Alors, avant de commencer, j'aimerais souligner que nous nous trouvons sur le territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe et reconnaître l'endroit où nous nous trouvons et notre relation continue avec les communautés autochtones est très importante pour le travail que nous faisons ici. Et nos musées donc reconnaissent que cette terre revêt depuis toujours une grande importance historique, spirituelle et sacrée. Et nous honorons la présence durable du peuple algonquin ainsi que nos relations avec les communautés locales de Kitigan-Zibi et de Pikwakanagan. So thank you all for joining us today as we mark the 75th anniversary of NATO, and thank you to our panelists. On April 4, 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed. Its mission, implementation of the North Atlantic Treaty, which was signed the same day in Washington, D.C. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was a defensive alliance meant to deter the Soviet Union's political and territorial expansion in the early years of the Cold War. Decades later, when the Cold War ended, NATO found a new purpose in supporting peace operations and other efforts to preserve the rules-based international order in Europe and beyond. Its members have expanded to include former rivals, now partners in security, in an unstable and uncertain world. It is difficult to overstate the importance of NATO in Canada's post-war military history, as it has influenced our defense policy and the equipment we have developed and used in peacetime and in war. It has also provided an important forum to articulate shared values and debate the way forward in difficult times. Cold War NATO deployments in Western Europe shaped generations of Canadian soldiers, sailors, and flyers. After the Cold War, NATO supported Canada in some of the most difficult operating environments, and Canada's most important missions continue under the NATO flag. The alliance has proven a vital means to train and develop future leaders. It is for that reason that the War Museum's displays about NATO form the core of the experience of our Gallery 4, titled Cold War, Peacekeeping, and Recent Conflicts. And there is scarcely a veteran of those times who has not been influenced in some way by Canada's participation in this vital alliance. If you haven't already seen it following the short tour this morning, I really do hope you'll have a chance to visit it later today. Very few political military organizations are able to stand the test of time. NATO is an outlier in this regard. As it marks, its 75th anniversary, it may well be the most enduring and wide-ranging multinational security alliance in human history. And that is certainly something worth celebrating. Alors, bienvenue encore une fois. Je suis certaine que vous trouverez de matière à réflexion lors de notre table ronde de ce matin, alors que nous participons à une conversation très passionnante sur l'héritage, l'impact et l'influence de l'OTAN avec nos panélistes ici. I hope you'll find this morning's discussion fascinating, giving all of us a lot of food for thought as we engage in compelling conversations around NATO's legacy, impact, and its influence. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. I think you can hear me. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to the Canadian War Museum for organizing this event as we mark the 75th anniversary of NATO. I'm Michael Serapio, and I'm honored to be here, taking part on behalf of CPAC, the Cable Public Affairs Channel. Now, as we heard, it was on April the 4th, 1949, when NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, came into being. 12 founding countries, including Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, just to name a few, coming together to protect Western democracies from the political ambitions of what was then the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Since then, NATO has served as the backbone of Western defense. It has adapted to a changing world, and it has grown from 12 to what is now 32 member countries, and perhaps very important here, proven itself a successful alliance and a model of global cooperation. But 75 years in, and as we know, NATO's mission is not over. Right now, there is a war in Europe as Russia brings conflict to NATO's doorstep with its ongoing illegal invasion of Ukraine. And to that, the Ukrainian ambassador is here. Good morning, Ambassador. So as we reflect on what NATO has represented and accomplished from 1949 to 2024, this morning we're joined by an extraordinary panel to discuss the challenges NATO faces right now, to discuss how the alliance and its member countries must prepare for the next 75 years. So with that, let me introduce the people who are on with the stage with me this morning, beginning with David Cohen. David Cohen is the U.S. Ambassador to Canada before his appointment by President Joe Biden. Ambassador Cohen was senior advisor to the CEO of the Comcast Corporation, a past executive VP at Comcast, and a former chief of staff to the mayor of Philadelphia. His Excellency has been in Ottawa since December of 2021, or as Ambassador Cohen likes to put it, 3 winters. Ambassador Cohen, welcome.
Thank you.
Susannah Goshko is the British High Commissioner to Canada. Previously, she has served as Principal Private Secretary to the UK's Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. She has also served as the UK's Permanent Representative to the UN's Environment Programme and the UN Habitat. And she has also had a number of postings in the Americas. Her Excellency has been in Ottawa since September of 2021. High Commissioner, welcome. Jari Vilén is Finland's ambassador to Canada, and before coming to Ottawa, was Finland's ambassador to the Barents and Northern Dimensions, while he also concurrently served as chairman of the Finnish Barents Euro-Arctic Council presidency. In the past, he has also served as Finland's ambassador to Hungary and Poland. His Excellency has been in his current post since September of last year, but coming from Finland, winter is not a surprise to him. Ambassador Vilén, welcome.
First winter in Canada.
There we go. Marie-France Lalonde is the Member of Parliament for Orléans here in the Greater Ottawa area. She is also the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. Madame Lalonde, welcome. And last but certainly not least, Major General Greg Smith is the Director General for International Security Policy at the Canadian Department for National Defence. He has served in each of the battalions of the Royal Canadian Regiment. He was Commanding Officer of the Canadian Special Operations Regiment, Commandant of the Canadian Army Command and Staff College, and Director of the Royal Canadian Infantry Corps. And I have to say this, as a proud past resident of Oshawa, Ontario, he was born in the Schwa. So, Major General Smith, welcome to the panel today. Now, as we begin our discussion, I want to point out to everybody in the room that we have set up a microphone in the middle. And towards the end of our discussion, in the last 15, 20 minutes or so, we invite people to come to that microphone and ask any of our panelists a question. I have no answers, but these are very smart people to the left of me, so by all means, ask them any question that you like. But with that, I will remind you as we get towards the end of the program to start lining up. But I do want to begin with a question that'll just go down the row, if you will, beginning with you, Ambassador Cohen. When we speak of NATO, what makes the alliance still relevant, if not more relevant than when it came together back in the 1940s?
Well, first of all, Michael, thank you for lending your expert services as the moderator, and I also want to thank the War Museum for hosting us. I actually can't think of a better place, better venue to have this particular event. So I think NATO is one of the great success stories of alliances and one of the great success stories of defense and preservation and growth of democracy around the world. And I think that, in a nutshell, is what makes NATO even more relevant today, because there are more than a few challenges to democracies around the world, and it's awfully nice. I'll speak on behalf of one country, but I bet every member feels the same way. It's awfully nice to have now 31 other allies, total of 32 allies, joined with a unity of purpose and a unity of togetherness and commitment to working together to defend, and the key word for NATO is defend. It is a defensive alliance. It is not an offensive alliance, but working together to defend ourselves, but to defend causes of democracy all around the world. And I think there were people, Vladimir Putin may have been one of them, who sort of thought NATO might be a little rocky, and there might have been an opportunity to divide and to make NATO less than that which it has been historically. And I think it is remarkable in the wake of the illegal and horrific invasion of Ukraine by Russia that Vladimir Putin has almost single-handedly served as the greatest unifying force in our current memory of NATO, and we are even more aligned today than we have been at any time in our history, and I think that is awfully good, not only for all of us, but for the world.
High Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Michael. Lovely to be here with you. And also thanks to our audience for showing up on a Friday morning to hear us speak. It's a real privilege to be part of this conversation. I would say that the thing about NATO is, in a way, it risked becoming the victim of its own success, in that about 10 years ago, we got to the point where we almost thought we'd done it, we'd achieved peace. We were in a world where we took it for granted a bit. My children thought that this was normal, and in a way, we'd created that situation through the success of NATO. Fast forward 10 years, it no longer feels like that. The world is increasingly conflicted and complex. And the ambassador has talked about what we're seeing happening in Ukraine, Russia's moves against Ukraine, which were betting on NATO not being as united as it is. Nobody is asking themselves anymore what the purpose of NATO is. We've all realised that coming together in this defensive alliance, we need to be stronger than ever, we need to be more united than ever. We have a real clarity of purpose because we recognise that peace is the one thing we can't afford to be complacent about. And a defensive alliance is the best guarantee of our own collective peace. So I would say that while 10 years ago we might have asked ourselves, is this still relevant? That no longer feels like a question to me. We can see that there are countries out there who don't share our values and approach to the world, and by clubbing together we guarantee our best chance of peace.
Ambassador.
Thank you much for the invitation here. Pleasure to be here in this snowy morning, which feels like being at home. I think the fact that Finland celebrated first anniversary in the NATO is a testimony of why the NATO is so important. And of course, we are very happy that also our neighbor Sweden were able to celebrate as a member of the NATO in just moments ago. And I think interesting to see that for Finns, the decision joining NATO was very pragmatic. We've been always neighbors to the Soviet Union, Russia, whatever it has been called and whatever system it has been. And it's always been a challenge, the small nation and the values and democracy, what we have. Sweden did the same decision because they also felt the same thing, that President Putin's policies and his aggressiveness and unpreparedness that he presents to the whole world is something that only way to defend our values, our principles, our democracy, and the way of life that we want to do is joining the NATO. And that's, as Ambassador said here before, I think this is the best testimony about the importance and value of what the NATO can provide to us now and also in the future. There were moments, as said, when we thought and believed at peace among us, and there's no need for this kind of confrontation. But unfortunately, the decisions, especially in Russia, led to the situation where we are at the moment. And I think, as said, there's more value, there's more importance than ever before. And I think it's important that we talk about the military capabilities, which are defenses, but also, as said before, I think it's important we talk also about the political union and political alliance that shares the same principles and defends these values. Actually, I would like to mention to you, I'm half Swedish, so I can speak a bit about the Swedish side also. So it was really intriguing what I found yesterday, that Sweden, as the newest member of the NATO, has decided to include in school curriculum agenda concerning the importance of the NATO, role of the NATO, and what NATO is about it. And I think this is a wonderful decision which tells about the values, what want to be taught to the young children and future generation, what NATO actually is. Maybe a good idea also for Canada.
I know. That's the province.
Yeah. How convenient that Madame Lalonde is right there.
Well, thank you very much to the organizers. I first want to say happy 75th anniversary to all our members. As a proud founding members, I think Canada has always valued the role and the importance of NATO. I would also say to our serving member, thank you for your service. To all of you and also our veterans in here today, thank you on behalf of Canada for everything you've done to protect and secure peace in the world. For me, and I say this very broadly, and I'll echo a lot of what our colleagues have said, but I see a change. A change in our ways of doing and how we need to move forward. We reflect on Ukraine as to 2022. I will reflect back in 2014. You know, it's been many years that we have observed this evolution of individuals who are completely against democracy, against peace, wanting to create chaos. Here in Canada, we've been blessed. But we cannot take this for granted. And I would say more than ever, the world needs NATO. We need each other. And as it was mentioned, Vladimir Putin did not expect this alliance, this organization to come so strong. So I'm very proud as Canada's commitment, and I'm sure we'll continue elaborating on this. But I would say this year alone, there will be 70 elections in the world. There is 60 conflict, war. More than ever, we need to stand together to protect world peace, if I can say, Michael. And thank you for hosting us, and to the War Museum.
General.
Thank you, Michael, and I'm honored to be on the stage today, and I'm appreciative to be at the end here where I can think about my question and how I'm going to respond to it.
You'll go first next.
Oh, thank you, Ambassador. I think first and foremost, NATO's a family. And the family started at 12 and it's up to 32. I don't know how far this analogy goes, but it argues like a family, but in the end, you know, we all love each other. We're all still in the same group. And I've gone to Brussels and get talked at sternly by other members of the family from time to time. But in the end, they all say, you know, we still love you, but this is what we want out of you. And I think that's important. It is an organization that, if you think about it, has transitioned a lot. I think the original statement about the goal of NATO was something like keep the US in, the Soviets out, and Germany down. Well, there isn't a Soviet Union anymore, and nobody's trying to keep Germany down, of course. And so it's transitioned in the early 90s, started looking at Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. It's made all these changes, and then post-2014, it has refocused again, perhaps to more its reason to exist originally. So that's the family. The family argues about that. Not everybody's happy how it does, but in the end, they get together and agree that politically, that's the direction we're going to go. Hey, military people, that's what we need you to plan, and it functions. So I think it's it continues to be relevant for that because of its flexibility.
You know, Ukraine has been mentioned more than once. And as I said, the war, the illegal invasion carried out by Russia in Ukraine right now, the attempts to take over the country, is on the doorsteps of NATO. And I'm wondering how that reality influences how you see NATO evolving and how it responds to this challenge. Because as we heard from President Zelensky, he does not believe, and I think many people echo the sentiment, if the Kremlin, if Putin is successful in Ukraine, it will not stop at Ukraine. Ambassador Cohen, do you want to begin now?
Well, I think the question really sets up the answer, and I say that as a true sense of compliment. I think one of the things that certainly all of us on this stage, but really more importantly, every member of NATO, and in fact the coalition in support of Ukraine is even broader than NATO. There are now more than 50 countries that have joined this coalition and that have individually and collectively pledged our joint commitment to continue supporting Ukraine. I don't know who coined the phrase, but I know that President Biden uses it all the time, for as long as it takes. And I think that is an almost unique commitment, certainly in my lifetime. And it is an example of the kind of commitment and support that an alliance like NATO can provide. And make no mistake, it is the NATO alliance that is the backbone of that larger alliance that is committed to supporting Ukraine. And I'd like to think that for most of us, that part of that commitment is based upon our view that any democracy that is under attack, an illegal attack by an autocratic nation, deserves our support, and that we should support Ukraine simply because Ukraine is a democracy in need of support. And I'm sure that's a significant motivating factor for all of us, but I just don't think that there is any doubt that there is a larger cause here, and that is today Ukraine, tomorrow who knows who. And if we let Russia get away with just trampling Ukraine's rights and its sovereignty, who knows who's next, not only by Russia, but whether that empowers other autocratic nations. Does it empower China to do something because Russia got away with it? Maybe we can get away with it. So I think that whole coalition, I think NATO's support of Ukraine is absolutely based upon the values that Ukraine stands for, on the need of a democracy, for support from other democracies and the rest of the world. But I also think there is a healthy element of self-interest here, because if we don't stand up to this action when Ukraine is the target, then it is inevitable that somebody else will be the target, and that we'll have to then stand up again. And one of the hallmarks of NATO, I think, Susannah, you said this in your remarks, is that just our existence as a defensive alliance is a huge deterrent. And I think our unified commitment and support of Ukraine is a significant deterrent to aggressive action by the world's autocracies against the world's democracies.
Hi, Commissioner.
I mean, I absolutely share what the ambassador said. There can be no doubt that if we don't stand up to Putin now, he will come back for more, because he's done it before. We're not asking ourselves speculatively about what will happen. We're looking at the past and reflecting forward from it, and it's really clear. If we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, then he will come back for more. And I absolutely agree with the ambassador's point as well, that this isn't just about Ukraine. We should be asking ourselves which other countries are watching how we act and how we behave, and what lessons are they drawing from it. And that should be a stark warning to all of us wherever we sit in the world, because this isn't just about Europe. Obviously, NATO is about Euro-Atlantic security, but we must ask ourselves the question, when we're talking about standing up for countries, what message are we sending more broadly? And for me, that is a really important part of this. When we look specifically at Ukraine, there can be no question there that we have what we need to help Ukraine prevail. Our collective economies and our collective military ability is significantly more than Russia has. So our ability to fund Ukraine until Ukraine prevails and to support Ukraine, we have all of that. The question we have to ask ourselves now is, do we have the will to do that? And the challenge for us all is, if we don't do this now, we need to recognise that the costs down the line will be higher, both economically and in terms of threats to our people and the values that we stand for. So it's essential that we stand with Ukraine until Ukraine prevails now, not just in our interests, as the ambassador said, but also asking ourselves the question about who else is watching.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of the truism that nature abhors a vacuum. If there's a space, someone will occupy it, and the question is, if not NATO, who? You know, ambassadors, we talk about Ukraine and the lessons out of it and what it teaches. As one of the newest members to NATO, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's a self-evident fact which we have to recognize, that Ukraine is fighting not just for itself, it's fighting for ourselves, our freedom and way of our life. And I think this is something that we should be able to communicate to our citizens and our political decision makers. I talked with President Mauno Koivisto, who was a very senior Finnish president previous year. He was also serving in the Second World War. And he told me something about what it means to negotiate with the Russians, with his experience both in war and peace. And it's something which stuck to my mind and always remember. With the Russians, you have to draw the red line. There's a room of maneuver, but you have to draw the red line, and you will never, ever allow the Russians to cross that one. We have now drawn the red line, and we should stick to this red line and not allowing them to cross that red line which we are defending, and it includes also the liberty and freedom of the Ukraine. And that's a self-evident fact. We are one of the few countries in the world who even after the Cold War and during the time when we thought the peace is there, never let our guard down. Finland has always been prepared in defending its from the eastern border against the aggression from Russia. And we are one of the new countries who are generally contributing to the security of the NATO, together with Norway, together with Sweden, or the Nordic partners that we have in there. Actually, this week, Finland signed the security agreement with the Ukraine. We gave 23rd package of the military support, which including roughly 2 billion euros of military material for the Ukraine. So this tells about the level of commitment what we have. And I have to really say that imagine a country who has been 1 year member of the NATO. We have today highest support for the NATO membership in any NATO countries, 90% of the Finns support. And which honestly I have to say was a surprise to me. 90% of the Finns are supporting the idea that as a part of the alliance, part of the second newest member of the alliance, we are committed to send our troops to defend the NATO alliances, including the Canadians. So it tells that the profound knowledge what we have about Russia is also action that we do in and how we want to reflect the world and also be part of the alliance also in the future.
Madame Lalonde?
I would say a little bit more on the political side because I represent Canada and I'm a very proud Canadian when I say this also. As we said, in our Prime Minister and our Deputy Prime Minister, and I would say we are fully committed to Ukraine in its efforts for all of us. And Ambassador Cohen, when you're saying for as long as it takes, this is a message that the Prime Minister and many members of our government have mentioned. I'll say personally, when I watch on my television set the invasion, that illegal invasion, I did not believe that this was possible. So in my view as a Canadian, as a member of Parliament, I believe firmly that we Canadians needs to support Ukraine. You know, our government have put forward $13 billion in various approach to humanitarian, military, close to $4 billion. And we will continue. And when I speak with some of our members of our CAF, I think one thing that they always reflect is how proud they are in many ways of the training that we have provided. Over 40,000 Ukrainians have been trained by our members. At the same time, I don't think we wanted to have this happen. So we need to support Ukraine. We need to continue in our ways. And NATO, through other countries, are stepping up. And we have to stand strong because this war is a war against all of us. Every single democracy in the world. And when we mentioned the watching part, that deterrence, the sacrifice that Ukrainians are doing for all of us, people are watching. And we have absolutely need to have this alliance, but also other countries in helping us. So from a Canadian, from a member of Parliament, from here representing Canada, we will be with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
General?
Yeah, Michael, a couple things. So first of all, I'd absolutely echo the idea, and I think the fancy academic term is the rules-based international order. And I say that big term as I recognize right now there's fighting going on in Ukraine between the Russians and the Ukrainians. People are dying right now. But when I travel around the world, internationally, people will recognize you can't let big countries invade small countries just because they can. Borders are sacred. It's been set up since about 1945, the post-World War II Rooseveltian order saying this is how the world works, and to let this begin and continue, what's next? And Canada's in that. We're very fortunately in Europe training with the Ukrainians, training the Ukrainians with a lot of our allies. And at the same time in Latvia, beautiful little Latvia, we have maybe about 1,000 soldiers, sailors, air personnel, and special forces there. That'll be going upwards of 2,200. They used to call it an enhanced forward presence. NATO loves its terms. It's now going to become the forward land forces. And we're very happy to be leading that in Latvia with 11 other countries, showing that deterrence, that this is not a country to mess with and it's not an alliance to mess with.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to pick up on a point that both the High Commissioner and Ambassador Cohen made about political will in this. And it made me think about the 2% target, that NATO members are meant to be investing in defense. It was an issue even before Russia's most recent invasion of Ukraine. And to my understanding, only a third of member countries actually meet and or exceed the 2% target. All others fall under.
A little better.
A little better?
NATO just announced that 20 out of the 30
So it's gone up.
will reach at least 2% by the end of 2024. So up to 2/3.
But how important is that target, Ambassador?
So I have talked a lot about this. So for people who followed this, they'll get tired of hearing me say this. So I think investing in NATO is incredibly important. I think investing in our common defense is incredibly important. For the United States, and that's all I can speak for, we choose to look at commitments to defense and commitments to NATO in a broader view than reference to any one single metric. And obviously that has relevance in Canada because the Canadian media certainly makes a very big deal of the fact that Canada is not spending 2% of its GDP on defense. And we choose to look at Canada's overall commitment to defense. So yes, we do look at the percentage of GDP that is spent on defense, but we look at a wide range of other factors. What is the trajectory of spend? And Canada's trajectory of spend has been up and up sharply in the last 5 years. We look at Canada's responsiveness to requests for assistance and support. So for example, when a call goes out to NATO countries for support for Ukraine, we look at $4 billion of military assistance that Canada is providing to Ukraine through 2029. We look at Canada's commitment in the Indo-Pacific and the new Indo-Pacific strategy and a commitment to further defense and other objectives in the Indo-Pacific. We look at Canada's commitment to the Arctic and to continental defense and to Canada's commitments to NORAD modernization and the significant additional investments that are taking place there. And more recently, we look at what is Canada doing to improve its defense preparedness, for example, in terms of equipment and planes and radar and domain awareness. And in just the last year, Canada has committed to the purchase of 144 of future aircraft capacity, fighters, P-8s, which is domain awareness, providing incredible domain awareness for maritime awareness. So just the past year, making commitments, 144 aircraft and an expenditure of $44 billion. So I think the question of investment in our defense is a very fair question. I think Defense Minister Blair has made crystal clear that he knows that Canada needs to do more, has to spend more, has to move closer to the 2% target as quickly as it can. And for the United States, we think that broader view is the right, most accurate, and fairest way to look at Canada's commitment to defense.
High Commissioner.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we're living in a moment where there's lots of pressures. We're coming out of a pandemic where a number of us most countries have had to spend huge amounts of money to shore up their economies, and there's a cost of living crisis in many countries around the world. There's lots of different pressures on what governments are being asked to spend money on. But I think one of the interesting things is when you look back over history, when people have been asked to make choices about whether they spend money on defence or not, when the case is fully made to people, particularly the case for spending money up front to save costs further down the line, on the whole you bring people with you on that. And I look back to the post-Second World War reconstruction effort in the UK, when people were literally asked, should we divert money from the reconstruction into rearmament? And those who had lived through the Second World War and knew that they never wanted to experience that again, and knew that the best chances of being able to protect themselves against doing that sort of thing in the future was that deterrence effect of rearming themselves, agreed that we should divert money from reconstruction into rearmament. I think we're at a moment where the world is very conflicted and there are some very tough choices to make. We as the UK have long been a proponent of the 2% commitment. We championed it at our 2014 NATO meeting, and we were really in favour of the moves at Vilnius to make 2% the floor of commitment, not the ceiling. And so we were really pleased that all of NATO countries agreed to that at Vilnius. And we're looking forward to seeing countries' plans to getting there, delighted that 2/3 of countries will be there during the course of this year. And we think it's important that every country does have a plan to get there, because the effectiveness of NATO depends upon us being a credible deterrent. And so for that reason, we think that that 2% commitment is very important.
It's very easy for me to continue, very brief, that we believe that there's a joint political commitment to aim for the 2% and commit for the 2%. And we are in 2%, bit over 2% at the moment. And we believe that there's a commitment what you have made and you have to obey it. And of course, I know well aware, and I don't have to be as elaborate as Ambassador Cohen about what the situation in Canada is about that. For us, I don't want to go to the debate about the numbers or figures. For us, of course, our main concern and interest is that Canadian contribution in the European security, as was mentioned by General Smith in here, but particularly also in the future in the Arctic. The lifeline for us also future is that maintaining the connection between the North American and the European when it's needed and if it's needed in that terms. In the Second World War, after the Second World War, the Canadian Navy was the 3rd largest in the world. And we were talking the Indo-Pacific commitment that we have, but the fact is also that how to secure the Canada can also provide that support that we need to secure in the lifeline going into Europe if that is needed in there. And the fact is, and I think it's important as mentioned here, the Canadians also see the fact that the threat and concerns are more and more in the north. If you look what the Russians are doing and what kind of contribution they're building in the north, to be very frank with you, we don't feel threatened by Finland or Sweden or Norway, what they're doing there. What they're building there is particularly the threat in the North America. Nuclear submarines, ballistic missiles, what they have, strategic bombers, etc. And I do hope that there's raising awareness in Canada also concerning the commitment that you have to have together with the USA also in that direction. And a commitment concerning that we need to have the transportation routes secured. It's a way like, honestly, going back to the basics, going back to the Cold War times, securing that the Russian submarines are not coming, and in the future securing that the Chinese submarines are not coming over the Arctic to your eastern coast.
Madam, 1 second, Madame Lalonde, I will get to you, but I'm going to just remind people there's a microphone in the middle of the room for you to ask questions of the panelists. We're approaching the last 15 minutes or so of our discussion, so I invite anyone with questions to start lining up, and we'll get to you as soon as we finish this discussion, or this question at least. You know, and as we hear so far from their excellencies, Madame Lalonde, it does bring up a number of thoughts for me, not only the 2% target, but the issues of commitment and the issues of preparedness. So how would you respond to the importance of the question about the importance of this 2% target?
Well, I think the question, because I know this is a very important question and it's a very public question, as we all know. I'll say this from maybe a perspective of a little bit of me into this messaging, if I could say, but also from a perspective of Canada and how Canadians have been blessed. I started to say we've been blessed with peace. Post-Cold War, we were one of the countries that actually stop investing to the same level in our defense spending. And in 2014, it actually got close to below, a little bit 1% of our GDP. Everybody here in this room knows what 1% of GDP, but to say we probably didn't keep par to where we needed to do. And indeed, in 2017, we brought the SSE strong, secure, engaged policy. And, you know, it brought our commitment of increasing spending by 70% by 26-27. Our Prime Minister mentioned that we need to find a way, and that's what we're working on. Certainly I appreciate the Ambassador Cohen in reflecting of other area, and I hear the sensitivity about the Arctic. Here in Canada, my government and I believe in climate change and its impact in world peace. So the Arctic is very relevant. We propose the modernization with a significant amount of new dollars in that modernization in our bilateral agreement with our United States, our closest and most welcome partner. Having said that, we are also very sensitive and very committed in developing what we've seen as a trend, and I would say more as a rapid trend of what's happening in the world. So Canada has always participated, answered the call. We've made investment in the last few years, as it was reflected by Ambassador Cohen, and there's more investment coming. But we are not neglecting the fact that we need to move forward in the development of a review of the policy to give guidelines and to show that commitment. So I know we've talked about this, we've been consulting, there was the war, the illegal war against Ukraine, and that reflection needs to materialize in a little bit of the perspective of what our closest friends are saying. Canada has always done its fair share, has always committed to NATO, but also others, and we will be there, that's for sure. So we'll make sure that Canada remains safe, that the sovereignty of our nation is protected. So for me, that's very important that we share that message. And it's not just myself, it's our Prime Minister who have shared that message, and certainly Minister Blair, who is not short of words when it comes to that perspective. We are there with our members. We want to support them and their families, and that's what, in our allies, and that's what we'll do.
General.
No?
Well, Michael, I speak several languages, and political's not one of them. But I would say from my NATO experience, and just to echo a bit Madame Lalonde, I had a grandfather wounded in France in 1918. My wife has a great uncle buried in the Netherlands. There's 3 military cemeteries. He's buried in the last one. So Canada's there when we're needed. We're there to help the alliance when it's needed, or Europe. But from my time in NATO, the family's not angry at us. They just want more.
Fair enough. And I see people are lining up. Thank you for participating. As you ask your question, I also ask you to begin, at the very least, with a name that your question be directed to, and to our panelists. If anything comes to mind, by all means, jump in. And please introduce yourself.
Hi there. My name is Brandon, and my question is directed at you, Major General, specifically, but I welcome all other panelists to chime in as well. Over the past couple of years with Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, I think in the view of civilians around the world, Russia's global superpower strength has been depleted. My question for you is, after this conflict is over, where do you see the next real world threat being to start a world conflict? Do you see it being Pakistan being an unstable nuclear region? Do you see it being China aggressing towards Taiwan? What areas do you see, and what impact do you see that having on both NATO and just the world in general?
I hope the question was for you.
One of those small questions.
I particularly liked your reaction when you heard that was being directed to you.
Write this down. No, thank you for the question. One of my jobs is kind of react to things that happen and make sure everybody understands. And so it was a very busy summer. And I don't say that lightly when there's tragedies going on around the world. Remember Sudan? That fighting's still occurring very actively. We evacuated a bunch of Canadians out, and we don't talk about it anymore. Nagorno-Karabakh, that happened. That's still a thing that's happening out there. Ukraine, there's people fighting and dying every day. So there's problems around the world. But I think today, as we stand to talk about NATO, so Russia has taken damage in Ukraine through the heroism of the Ukrainian people. That being said, Russia will come back. Russia, we already know it's industrially reproducing. It's going to want to be able to do more. So I don't want to take the eye off the ball of Russia itself. And that's why we, the family of NATO, need to continue to focus on, maybe we have a bit of time. We can thank the Ukrainian people for that. We have a bit of time, but there's going to be more coming, and we need to make sure that we're ready.
Can I just jump in very quickly?
Of course.
Just something which some senior politicians said once. Russia is never as strong as foreseen and never as weak as we foreseen it. And that's the challenge with Russia as we're trying to predict the future. The country which seems to be so solid as a totalitarian state, when it collapses suddenly. And that's why it's extremely difficult to predict. When it happens, and it really doesn't matter how we try to guess and who will be there and what happens in there. We have to defend the values, as I said, and this is the most important thing. What we're doing now is also defending the way of we live and fundamental values. And I think that's the message, global message that we want to see through the NATO and through our alliances which are linked to us, whether they come from the Indo-Pacific area or somewhere else.
It really goes to what Susannah said before, which is I don't think any of us want to predict where the next problem is. It's one of the powers of NATO, one of the strengths of NATO is the overall deterrent impact that we have no matter where the next problem area is. We don't have to figure out, where the next trouble spot is going to be and how we deal with it. The very existence of NATO and our mutual commitment deters all adverse conduct against democracies anywhere in the world.
And I think we will see that in Washington very soon.
Can I just come in? I don't want to comment on which country. It feels like a path I don't want to go down. But I think the one thing we haven't really talked very much about, which is unquestionably going to have an impact on all of our security, is the impact that climate change is about to have on the world. The reality is, we know, yes, you mentioned it earlier, that the reality of this is that, if we can't keep global warming to 1.5, at most 2%, we know that that's going to have, and is already having, really serious effects that are going to lead for global competition for resources, mass migratory flows, all sorts of things that will create conflict. And I think we have to be eyes wide open amongst ourselves that is something that's coming down the track, and thinking now about how we're going to engage with and respond to that. And again, ideally get ahead of the curve to stop some of these awful things happening.
By all means.
I'll echo this, actually. I think climate change has to be viewed as part of our threat analysis and the chance of seeing that impact. I think the migration is occurring already. I do think that if we don't look at climate change from a Canadian footprint, the sovereignty, the Arctic, and furthermore, Canada is blessed with a lot of critical minerals. So as we have this transition, if the world doesn't acknowledge the reality of climate change and its impact, we've been very firm in saying that it has an impact in the world. And NATO is so important in that space of continuing to mobilize our efforts to prevent. So we are aware, let's not miss the target of addressing it. We need hands-on approach on this, and we need to work all together. Again, I like the family dynamic. We may not always agree, but we have to come together to determine what are the next steps based on this. So for us in Canada, for sure, climate change as one, and will have the biggest impact in our next year, 5, 20, and 50 years. And if we don't commit to addressing it now, for sure, I am not minimizing the loss of life from Ukraine, Haiti, we have not addressed that, in the Middle East, crises are occurring, conflicts and war are occurring every day. So, you know, let's not be naive of what's happening. We are at war in many ways with what's happening in our world.
Brendan, thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, Major General, Madam Parliamentary Secretary.
Morning, dear colleagues. Yulia Kovalev, Ambassador of Ukraine. And I probably will want to give you a bit of gloomy picture. You're talking all about 2% future commitment to NATO spendings. This year, Russia is already spending almost 40% of its budget to defense, military, and law enforcement. We have robust sanctions. But unfortunately, Russian military sector continues to circumvent the sanctions. And you all know pretty well that there are many of the Western spare parts in Russian drones, in Russian military, and it requires real actions. As we are talking now, Russia continues every day to destroy Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian infrastructure, critical infrastructure. We have hundreds of thousands of people without access to electricity. And I just want to, our Minister of Foreign Affairs was in meeting of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the NATO countries. And he was very direct saying, air defense is one of the crucial needs. Artillery shells. We are over 2 years resisting Russian aggression, with many of the people who represent the government here thought that Ukraine will fall down in 10 days. But if we will ask ourselves whether the production of ammunition have been ramped up to both really help Ukraine and help your own defense, what was really the other defense industries really supported so that we all can be more secure? The reality is also that Russia continued to build its military presence in Arctic. And for many countries, including Canada, that's very close. And this is all about the need for actions and the need for the prompt actions. The need for actions that, and many of the decisions that we all probably should have taken months ago, if not years ago. And I would like to recall probably on my last comment and question what my colleague Ambassador of Finland said about the red lines. I think writing to ourselves some imaginary red lines is something what Putin wants. He wants to threaten, he wants us to build these blocks. No, we can't do this, and let's remember at the beginning of the war, no NATO weapons, no fighter jets, no long-range missiles, no tanks. And thank you for the leadership of US and UK for breakthrough this and build the coalitions of the countries. But also there is one more thing which will be in coming months, the Washington NATO summit. And we are not only fighting to protect east flank of NATO. I think we, as a country, deserve to have a clear path to become a NATO membership. And that's where I'd like to share the history what Ukrainians have been few years before the war has been taught. You need to take an example of Finland, so-called Finlandization. Yes, probably it is a very good example for Ukraine. And indeed, overwhelming majority of Ukrainians also support Ukraine membership in NATO. So my question is for the Washington summit, what is your thoughts on how strong you all could be in making this clear signal, message, and decision for Ukraine?
And for people who didn't hear, Yulia Kovalev is Ukraine's ambassador to Canada. Did anybody want to begin with an answer?
I'd like to come in on that. I'd like to start by saying that Ambassador Kovalev is unquestionably one of the most powerful in speaking ambassadors and best representatives that Ukraine could possibly hope for here in Canada. She is fabulous about articulating Ukraine's cause. And for all of us who are sitting here talking, hearing you speak, Yulia, it's a reminder that this is really serious. This is your countrymen's lives that we're talking about. And I think you are a hugely powerful advocate for all of that. And Ukraine is lucky to have you, and we're lucky to have you as a colleague. Look, I mean, you said that your foreign minister had been at NATO foreign ministers this week. My foreign minister came straight out of that, Foreign Secretary David Cameron, and made a little media clip that it's worth you going and seeing, because he was bowled over by what your foreign minister said, and he says this in his clip. He absolutely took away the message that what you need is air defence, missiles, those sorts of things, and he's put out a really clear call. He said that he's going to go back and talk to our defence minister about it. He is asking his colleagues to go back and talk to their defence ministers about it. You know, every time we hear Ukrainians speak about the reality of life on the ground, it's hugely powerful. And, you know, we're doing as much as, let me reframe that because that isn't how I want to express it. We're doing a lot for Ukraine, but we want to do more. Okay. And we are committed to push ourselves to do more. And you asked about defence production. The reality is we've sent a lot to Ukraine, but we need to find a way to get things into people's hands on the battlefield even quicker. And we're determined that we're going to try and do that. Now, as far as Ukraine in NATO is concerned, I think our position on this is pretty clear. We've said that Ukraine's future is in NATO, and we're really hopeful that at the Washington summit we'll find a way to think about what that looks like and to draw Ukraine closer. We're pleased that the steps to get Ukraine into NATO have been changed, so that there's only a one-step process now, not a two-step process. And we're pretty clear what the trajectory is. But, you know, all power to you, Yulia. You are an amazing advocate for Ukraine.
Can I step in? Maybe starting with the Finlandization, because I think it's I have to comment. What happened in Finland during the Cold War time was out of the necessity, because we did not have any other choice in that circumstances. I very briefly said, I sincerely believe and hope that Ukraine had other choices that you can decide yourself what position you choose, what alliance you choose. And I think this is exactly what we all are working for at the moment. And I think, as you mentioned in here, that the best what you can do is keep on telling the message that you tell here in Canada and your colleagues in every single other NATO countries that what we have. The challenge, of course, is that in our countries, in our democracies, elections come and go, they have political influences, and we need to have the political debate in our countries. That's actually our strength that we have in these debates. And of course, the challenge is the time and time frame, that how long these decisions will take. But as I said, we have been done remarkable things in these 2 years now, which nobody else would have believed in the NATO and also in the European Union, which I would like to remind you. But we are in the process, and I think, as you mentioned, the question is that do we have enough time for going through this process, is whether you have enough strength and endurance to do that, and I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope that we're able to make the decision, particularly in the Washington summit, that will send these kind of strong messages to everybody.
So, Yulia, unfortunately, it would be so easy if the people sitting on this stage were in a position to make a decision as to whether Ukraine should be admitted to NATO. We could take care of this in about 3 minutes, but we're not. I will say that President and Secretary Blinken have made clear in the last month with a very simple, definitive statement, which I will reiterate here, which is Ukraine will be a member of NATO. So it is just a matter of now of working the process through. As everyone knows, we have the NATO summit in Washington, which President Biden is hosting. Front and center on the agenda for that summit is to create a clear pathway and to build a bridge for Ukraine's admission to NATO. And I don't think it's reasonable to assume that at the end of the summit, Ukraine will be admitted to NATO, but I think it is reasonable that there'll be a very clear path that has been defined so that Ukraine, both the government and the people of Ukraine, know that for the entire NATO alliance, the door is open, embracing, and that we all agree that Ukraine will be a member of NATO.
Madame Lalonde, did you want?
I certainly will not comment exactly, but I will say, I think through various action that our government have taken, from, solidifying, and I hear you about the sanction, but still Canada leading the way in many of these initiatives. I was a very proud parliamentarian when we got to vote on the Canada-Ukraine trade agreement. And I know for certain Canadians, they feel it's symbolic. For me, it meant that we need to work together in helping you achieve your goal. And I think Canada will be helping through diplomacy, through various channel, the most we can in helping you achieve your goal. I cannot speak on the NATO summit. That's, I'd say, I wish Minister Blair would be here today. But I can reassure you that you have friends in Canada, in our government, and certainly for us, our goal is to give you the tools from the military. You mentioned certain aspect of it, and I was very happy to see sort of a, I wouldn't say creative, but innovative way of how the friendship, this family came together in through Czech Republic. Canada signed this agreement to give you the munition to continue to fight. The air defense system, we are working towards all that. So for me, I would say, I can look at you and say, we're behind you. We will support you.
I apologize to those who are lined up, but our time has actually come to an end. And I thank everybody for being a part of today as we mark again the 75th anniversary of NATO. I thank our panelists who have shared their time with us this morning. So thank you to everyone that has gathered here, Ambassador David Cohen, High Commissioner Susannah Goshko, Ambassador Jari Vilén, Marie-France Lalonde, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense, and to Major General Greg Smith. Thank you very much for the time today, and thank you. I know this only begins discussions that will continue in the room as this day goes on. Thank you to the Canadian War Museum.
Yeah, thank you.